In those days, the crest was in service to the shade, protectors of Heartvale. Lady Lina de Peza is dead. The last time a noble of Heartvale was killed by crest hands, it sparked weeks of conflict between us and Lord de Soto's house. The Red Fox is not altogether pleased with the outcome, though I don't believe she blames our mages for their swift and final action. With her patronage, I doubt there will be overt consequences for de Peza's death, especially with the evidence of her participation in the cult of Vargosh. Our preparations are complete, and now all that remains is to board ship and set sail for Davenar. The captain has ordered me to accompany the squads, going after these cultists. As he put it, that's more likely to be interesting to the annals than the ongoing politics in Heartvale. I tend to agree. I have discovered that this is not the first time our company has crossed paths with these cultists. According to the annals, in the Book of Zevra the Untamed, the hallowed crest and talon of Kiest encountered worshippers of Vargosh 443 years ago in Othral, where a strange rotting sickness had swept through a number of villages. They routed the Vargosh worshippers and subsequently cured the villages. I would be curious to discover how this cult has survived and passed on its knowledge. Are there more powerful people in other places in the world who serve this dead god? If this cult has existed for this long, why have they not risen to greater prominence? As devotees of corruption and decay, are they destined to devour their own and never rise to the heights of power they seem to be striving toward? Perhaps I may find some of these answers when we arrive in Davenar. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, the Crest deal with the aftermath of Lady de Peza's attack, and Benn receives an unforeseen invitation. Find out what happens on episode 42, An Unexpected Conversation. On the last episode, battle was joined between the Crest and Lady de Peza's forces, both living and undead. Benn, Arid, and Orchid made a good initial showing, striking at both the living and undead forces that Lady de Peza brought to this battle. Orchid found themselves in the midst of a cluster of these undead creatures, and fortunately for them, Bone Eater, their ornately inscribed axe, was forged to destroy the undead. So they had a good old time just taking these undead stone throwers to pieces. Benn and Arid continued to fight close to the fire, where they were holding off Kingsword forces that were trying to recapture Ephraim Fellheart. But in the process, Benn missed seeing Gimbal, the once leader of the stone throwers, sneak around and begin freeing Ephraim Fellheart. Once he realized what was happening, he had to jump through a fire to get to the other side to stop Gimbal from doing so, but unfortunately Gimbal managed to free Fellheart's hands before Benn was able to stop him. Benn and Gimbal dueled for a brief moment, and Benn was injured in the process, though he ultimately won the battle after driving his blade through Gimbal's chest. In the aftermath of that duel, Fellheart rose up with his dagger to strike at Benn's back, but Erdira, who had been lurking in the shadows, ran out, tackled him, and together she and Benn were able to rebind Ephron Fellheart. While Orchid was continuing their dance of death amidst the undead stone throwers, they were set upon by a Necdesolith, this incorporeal worm creature with an exoskeleton that was seemingly under Lady Depeza's command. Orchid was almost crushed to death, but was able to decapitate the creature with their axe. Meanwhile, Arid faced off against Lady Depeza and managed to survive until Lephalia and the Red Fox arrived. The Red Fox tried to talk her friend Lina Depeza down, but Lady Depeza was full on mad, believing that Vargosh, the dead god of corruption and decay, would rise again to grant her immortality. She spewed out a cloud of acid, which the Red Fox attempted to contain, while Lephalia and Arid unleashed a torrent of fire that ultimately burned Lady Depeza to death. Arid himself was injured by the acid and collapsed, being at 5 out of 5 boxes of harm, and that is where we join our heroes. Orchid and Benn, seeing the aftermath of this magical conflagration, run over to grab Arid as he falls to the ground. Now, here's a good question to start off this session. Is Escorpheza, the chirurgeon of the crest, present? Because Captain Netheridge ordered Escorpheza to prepare for casualties. Would he have gone along on this ambush, assuming that there would be the possibility for death and injury in this endeavor? And I think the possibility is very likely, maybe even a near sure thing. Let's go with a near sure thing. Chaos rank of 5. 27 is a yes. So Escorpheza is present. And I think as Benn and Orchid catch Arid and lower him to the ground, Benn is calling out for the surgeon. Escorpheza hurries to the location and he says, "Yes, my friends, get away from him. I will take care of this one." And he crouches down and examines Arid, and he says, "Arid, my friend, come back to the land of the living." And he begins to administer some sort of tonic or tincture into Arid's mouth. Is that going to be good enough? I think we should, once again, look at healing. It just says you have to receive care soon or expire when you're at 5 harm. And since we have decided that Escorpheza is present, I'm going to count that as satisfied. So Arid is very injured, but he is doing all right. Benn, who's sitting at 4 out of 5 harm, and Orchid, who's sitting at 3 out of 5 harm, are pretty beaten up. I mean, especially Benn. He took a couple of blows from the axe head of Gimbal, and he is certainly injured, but he is still functional, for a lack of a better word. So is there more that we need to do here? Is there anything else that we need to see? I think the last thing that we need to see in this scene, as the Kingsword operatives who came with Lina Depeza are either dead or captured, and the undead stone throwers that were raised up have been destroyed. I don't think there's anything else that we need to do here in this scene, other than I think we see this moment of the Red Fox approaching Ephron Fellheart, who is once again bound and gagged. And I think he witnessed the death of his love, Lina Depeza. And so I think there are genuine tears streaming down his cheeks. And I think we see the red fox approach, and she crouches down in front of him, and she looks him in the eyes, and she says, "Ephraim Fellhart, I've been looking for you. You and I are going to have a very long and very meaningful conversation." And then that's where we will end this scene. So I went ahead and updated all of the characters for their advancement points because each of them used one of their highlighted stats in that battle. For Benn, it's steady and wily. He definitely used steady. For Arid, it's arcane and sly. He definitely used arcane. And for Orchid, it's fierce and steady. And Orchid used both. So Orchid is up to 4 out of 5 advancement points. Arid is at 2 out of 5. And Benn is also at 2 out of 5. We can also go ahead and mark off our thread of set a trap for Lady DePeza. And that leaves only one thread remaining. Travel to Davenar and confront the Vidala family. I suppose there is a question here of whether or not we need to add a thread of if there is any more corruption within the Kingsword, but maybe we can just answer that question with a fate chart roll. So, are there more operatives who served Fellhart directly inside the Kingsword who are tied up with the cult of Vargosh? I think it's very unlikely. I already was thinking that it was a pretty small group of people who were working on Fellhart's behalf within the Kingsword, and I feel like 10 seems like a pretty good number. So I'm going to say it's very unlikely. And we'll keep using the cast rank of 5. So very unlikely. These dice really, really love to mess around. I got a 2, which is an extreme yes. So yes, there are more operatives within the Kingsword who serve Ephraim Fellhart. And because it's an extreme yes, I think what that tells me is that Fellhart had a second in command, someone who was equally devoted to the cult as he was, who is also a part of the Kingsword, and is potentially going to be able to continue operating within the organization. So I think because of that, we have to add a new thread, which is root out the last cultists of Vargosh within the Kingsword. And I think the other question then that follows from that is, do we know that there are more operatives within the Kingsword who serve Fellhart and who worship Vargosh? And I think the only way we're going to find that out is if Fellhart spills his guts. Actually, I'm going to take that back because I did say that we captured some of the other Kingsword operatives, those who were trying to flee. So one of them could break. And I think because of that, we go from it being very unlikely that we find out about that to maybe even likely. Because I feel like the Red Fox has a lot of sway and a lot of ability to convince someone to tell her the information that she wants. Information is her game, and she knows it very well. So I'm going to say that it is likely that she finds out information about this lieutenant within the Kingsword. 67, which is a yes. So we know now that there is a lieutenant within the Kingsword who serves Vargosh and serves Fellhart, and therefore there are still a few around. We know that this person exists. Did we get their name? I'm going to say that one is somewhat likely. Still cast rank of 5. 85 is a no. So there was talk about this person, but nobody gave up a name. Maybe because the lower down people know that this person exists, but they go by a code name, and they're not actually the second in command of the Royal Dispatch Company. They're just Felhart's second in command. And so they are not a known quantity within this group. So we know that this person exists, but we do not know their name. All right. What other information do we need? Because here's the thing. The Crest need to get on a ship and sail off to Davenar. That is what their stated contract is. It's not to hunt out the last of these cultists of Vargosh within the Kingsword. I think that is probably going to be a job for the Shade, possibly with the Fellsword's assistance, because we know that the Fellswords have infiltrated a few of their soldiers into the Kingsword. So what needs to happen for the Crest to be ready to go? I think that is our next question and probably the next scene. The preparations are all being made. Saga and Captain Etheridge have been working with the Drift to book passage for the Crest. I guess here's another question that just sprung to mind. Are all of the Crest going? Or is Netheridge splitting his company in pieces and sending only some of the Crest to Davenar? Because then we've got an interesting question of, are all of our heroes carrying on to Davenar, or are some staying behind? All right, let's ask, is the whole company traveling to Davenar? I think it's very unlikely. 99 is an exceptional no. So very, very much not. The Crest have become embedded in Heartvale. They have a base of operations here, and I think it's working for Netheridge. Maybe he is a little tired of moving from place to place to place and is looking to not necessarily put down roots long term, but at least take a brief hiatus from traveling the world and constantly being in a new city, in a new country, in a new situation. And so he is definitely going to send a small group of Crest soldiers after the Vidala. Maybe that's because rumors have started to spread of the Crest working in Heartvale, and because of the relationship between Davenar and Heartvale, he's worried that if the whole company descends on this city, that Davenar is going to become suspicious that maybe this is a secret ploy to reignite the war. Even though, as far as Netheridge knows, Heartvale has no desire to restart that war. Yeah, so I think a small group of the Crest are going to head to Davenar. Are all of our heroes going to be part of that group? I feel like they've proven themselves to be a pretty effective team. So if one of them's going, all of them are probably going. And I think that is a sure thing. 26 is a yes. Yep. So all three of our heroes are going to head off to Davenar. I think the captain is going to assign Iron Gull and the lieutenant to go with them, along with a number of other Crest soldiers, because I think that Benn or Arid or Orchid are not ready yet to be the sort of officers in charge of an expedition. And because they are going against the Vidala, and that involves a certain level of magic, Lephalia is definitely got to be part of that as well. So we've got that sense of it, that Lephalia, Iron Gull, a squad of Crest soldiers, including Benn, Arid, and Orchid, are preparing to leave Heartvale and sail towards Davenar. Let's talk about advancement a little bit more before we move on to a couple of scenes. And we'll just go through these pretty quickly. Like I said, I've been marking the highlighted stats as we've gone along. And then let's take a look at entanglements. So for Benn, it's steal something valuable or important from someone powerful. I'm pretty sure kidnapping the leader of the Royal Dispatch Company counts for that. So we're going to mark 1 for that. For Arid, it's threaten or coerce someone powerful with your magic. Again, interrogating Ephraim Fellheart counts for that. So we're going to mark an advancement point for that. And then Orchids is publicly challenge someone tough to combat over a matter of honor, which they didn't really do. So not going to get an advancement point for that, unfortunately. And then let's talk about gaining honor. So advance faction interests, demonstrate skill. Oh yeah. Orchid definitely did that. Make a new connection. I don't think Orchid really made a new connection with anyone. Spread rumors or information. People have heard about the hulking Pharamorchian with the ornate axe, who is pretty dangerous. And so I think that probably applies for that. Arid, I think he also gets an honor point for advancing the interests of the faction. He also did not create a new connection, but I think rumors of his abilities have spread as well, so we'll give him 2. And I think the same is going to apply for Benn. So Benn's honor is at 5 now. Arid's is at 4, and Orchid's is at 3. Each of their barter goes up 1 as part of their working for the crest. And that should do it for advancement for the moment. A few days pass, and Benn, Arid, and Orchid spend time recuperating under the watchful eye of the crest surgeon Escorfeza. Once Arid, especially, is out of danger, they are released to recover in their own quarters. Benn, I think, is staying in his small apartment when there is a knock at the door. He slowly, gingerly rises and walks to the door, unlocking it and opening it to find Erdira outside. She smiles up at him and says, "Can I come in?" Benn nods and says, "Of course, come in." Opens the door fully so she can make her way in, and then shuts it behind her. She places a few items down on the small table and says, "I thought you might be getting thirsty and a little sick of being confined to these walls." Benn looks at the bundle on the table, and there's a bottle of fine wine as well as a few books. He looks at the books, and they are histories of Davenar, along with what is essentially a traveler's guide to Davenar. She says, "Since you're leaving soon, I thought it might be a good idea to familiarize yourself with the city before you get there." Benn nods and says, "I appreciate that. I can't say that I am excited about this journey to Davenar. Truth be told, I never thought I'd be going there like this. I always suspected it would either be in a prisoner transport or on a warship about to raid the city. Going as a mercenary never crossed my mind." Erdira draws out a knife and begins to cut away some of the wax that seals the bottle and pries it open. She pulls a couple cups down and pours into them and says, "I don't blame you. I would have thought the same. It's a little strange to be thinking about seeing a city that I've only heard about in school and have only heard tell about how much of a rival they are to us. Surely they can't be that different from us, right?" Benn shrugs, takes the proffered cup and takes a sip of it, and then nods appreciably, says, Thank you for not bringing ale. Erdira smiles and says, I thought this might be a nice alternative. I'm going with you. I'd like to go with you, she says. And Benn looks down into the cup and says, that is not for me to decide. That is for your superior and my superior to decide together. Erdira nods and says, the Red Fox has already decided. You will need a guide to Davenar. And I just so happen to know the operative that we have in the city. I can put you in contact with him. Very good then. It will be nice to have you along. She sips on the wine and smiles and says, my aunt also wanted me to extend to you an offer. Benn raises an eyebrow and looks at Erdira and says, Erdira, I already have a company. I don't need to be a shade as well. I don't think the shade are really my fit. Erdira chuckles and says, not exactly what she had in mind. Although, if you ever thought about it, I'm sure that she would be happy to have you aboard. No, this is a more personal offer. Something not for the crest, but for you specifically. At this, Benn furrows his brow a little bit and says, what do you mean? What could you possibly offer to me personally that would not benefit the crest? Why would you offer anything to me? I am but a member of a simple mercenary company. Erdira shakes her head and says, no, Benn, you're more than that. You have deep ties to Heartvale, and as such, you can be a protector in a way that others might not be. You can be true to the city of your birth. Benn turns his back and sort of walks over to the window and looks out. Says, Erdira, I joined the crest because I don't have a place in the city, not really. The place that I could have had came with too many ties, too many obligations. No, this is my place, being in the crest, serving the crest. The crest is my home now. Nonetheless, Erdira says, the offer. You can have, if you want, a few moments alone with your sister. At those words, Benn stiffens and half turns towards her and says, what did you say? Erdira is very calm, and there is some pain in her face, and she says, Ravia, she's being held here in the city, still. The Red Fox is willing to grant you some time to speak with her, because you kept Felheart from escaping. Benn considers this for a moment and says, Ravia, why would you let me speak with her? Why offer this now, truly? You and I both know that you're the one that kept Felheart from escaping. What game is the Red Fox playing? What does she gain from this? Does she gain something from this? Or is this a matter of kindness? I think it's 50-50. 71. No, she doesn't have anything to gain from this. It is a matter of kindness. I think Erdira says, Benn, my aunt is powerful in this city. She's known in this city. She has seen the powers of politics in Heartvale, and this is what she told me to tell you. She doesn't believe your sister is the monster that others say. She believes that your sister was a victim of politics, of soaring too high, too fast, without paying homage to the right people. And she was brought low for it. She couldn't do anything at the time to stop it or to change her fate. But she can at least grant this mercy, to let you speak with her before you leave Heartvale. But understand, Benn, this is a one-time offer. It may not come again. Benn considers this and then nods and says, "All right, I'll do it." Benn is led to a fort by the harbor. He's passed it many times, coming in and out of Tamor's bones. Erdira leads him to the gate and shows her shade coin. And they pass inside. They ascend a number of steps and are met by the warden of this place. Erdira exchanges brief words with him and then hands him a note with the Red Fox's seal on it. He reads over it and then nods and leads them even further up until they reach a small cell. Erdira takes the key from the warden, promising to return it, and then opens the lock. She turns to Benn and says, "I'll be out here. Knock when you're ready." Benn nods and says, "Thank you, Erdira. I think. I don't know what to expect." She shrugs and says, "No matter what, whether the stories are true or not, she's still your sister." Benn nods and then pushes open the door. He slips inside and closes it behind him and hears the distinctive lock click as Erdira turns the key again. He looks across this small cell and sees a woman sitting by a small desk. There's a stack of papers that she seems to have written on, and there are a few books strewn apart. The woman is wearing drab clothing, but the most distinctive thing that he sees is that her skin is the same olive tone as his, and her hair is the same dark, curly texture, and it's hanging down almost to her waist. She turns and looks at him, and for a brief moment their eyes meet, and Benn's heart twists as the woman sitting in front of him is smaller than he remembers, though she seems to have not lost any of her strength. Her eyes, looking at his, are quizzical and curious, and she says, "Kasayo, is that you?" Benn nods. "It's me, Ravia. I'm here." "What are you doing in here? Why did they let you in?" Benn looks at her and says, "Is that the only greeting I get after so many years?" She pales for a moment and then stands, walks across the short cell and wraps her arms around her little brother. Benn returns the embrace, and while they are in close, she whispers and says, "Why have they sent you? What is it that they are after?" Ben shakes his head and says, I don't think they're after anything. I did a favor for someone in power and was granted this mercy, that I would be able to speak with you for a few moments. She pulls away and says, And so you're here. Wonderful. How is the outside world? How are mother and father? It's Ben's turn to pale a little bit as he says, I've not seen them since my return from service. At that point, I think her eyes flick down to the badge on his chest. And she says, What is this? A talon and crest? What is it? I work for them now. They're a mercenary company. I've sworn my oath of service. The crest. She looks again a little closer at the emblem and then looks up at him, both of her arms on his shoulders, and she says, My little brother joined a mercenary company? Whatever for? Ben shakes his head and says, That's not important. What is important is, why are you here, Ravia? What did you do? She grows serious, turns back and walks back to her desk. She lifts the pile of papers and says, This is what I did. And then throws them back down on the desk. So you did not murder a bunch of innocents. You didn't go blood mad after the war and continue killing. Ravia looks at him and says, Is that what they told you? And you believed them? Ben shrugged and says, I've seen some strange things after the war. People doing odd things. Like joining a mercenary company? Ben looks away and says, Yes, that's one thing, I suppose. Little brother, I did not continue killing after the war. Far from it. Is she telling the truth? I think we can throw this to the fate chart. I think it's likely that she's telling the truth. Maybe even very likely. Let's call it very likely. 25. Yes, she's telling the truth. She is not a killer. So why is she here? Like Erdira said, it has to be politics. Let's roll action and subject. See if that illuminates a little. 56. Usurp. Well, that's a good political start. 65. Usurp intrigues. Okay, that's interesting. She says, Kasayo, I was a good captain. I was loved by my sailors, and we fought well in the war. But it wasn't always about fighting. It was also about protecting. Protecting Heartvale, protecting our family, protecting the people. I discovered there were a group of people in Heartvale who were seeking to prolong the war. They had waylaid a number of emissaries that came from Davenar, killed them and sent their bodies back as a way to inflate the aggression between our two city-states. They wanted the war to continue. And so I gathered what information I could and took it to the council, presented it, and it was accepted. It was because of that Lord de Soto was dispatched to speak with the Davenarans and eventually seal the peace that became the end of our war. But you see, those on the council are not always what they seem. There were those amongst the councillors who were part of this cabal that wanted to keep the war going, and so they conspired to make it seem as though I had committed these crimes. And so I was imprisoned. I was fortunate enough to not be executed. They said it was as an honor for my service to Heartvale. that my life was spared and I was to be imprisoned for all time. I don't know if that is a kinder thing, but I have recorded everything I know on these sheafs of paper. All the pieces of information that I have. I've spent my time writing my experiences. Of course, no one outside of here will see it, but I'll know. And now you know too. In all this time I've been here, I haven't had a single visitor. Not even mother and father. I don't even know if they tried to visit. I was told they disowned me, but I don't really believe much of what I hear in this place. I don't know who is on the payroll of these interests in Hartvale. How did you come to be here, Kasayo? Benn says, one of the people I helped is on the council. They paved the way for me to be here. I don't have long, but maybe we can speak for a little longer. Yes, please, tell me everything about what has been going on in your life and what is going on in the city. And so Benn and his older sister spend some more time talking about the goings-on in Hartvale. And I think he probably tells her in some broad strokes about his time with the Crest and the cult of Vargosh. And she says, that sounds truly terrible. Do be careful. Going to Davenar, it's a dangerous place. It's not like Hartvale. It's not as hopeful. It's a very fraught city, full of power and dangers aplenty. I'll be careful, don't worry. Good. And maybe, she looks thoughtfully at her desk, maybe you should take these papers with you. Maybe you can do something from the outside that I can't do from in here. Maybe you can make the changes that I couldn't. If you want, I don't want to place that burden on you, little brother. It was my failing that landed me in here. I should have been smarter. I should have minded my politic lessons at the scriptorium better. Benn shakes his head and says, I would be honored to take your papers and read them and do whatever I can. It's possible that when all this is over, maybe I can secure your release. She smiles and says, I would like that, of course. But really, it does me good to know that you're alive and well. I have missed you, little brother. I hope that we get to see each other again. But if not, know that I am proud of you. And that I love you very much. The two of them embrace. And Benn goes over and collects the papers and hides them on his person. Ravia's waiting by the door. And she smiles and hugs him once more and then kisses him on the forehead, although she has to stand on her toes to do so. She says, Have you grown even more than when last I saw you? Benn chuckles and says, I suppose it must be so. Good. I'm glad to know that there's a Demetza out there doing right by Hartvale. Good luck, little brother. And if I don't get to see you again, may the hunter guide your steps in all your endeavors. They embrace one last time, and then Benn knocks on the door. The lock clicks and opens, and he slips out. Ordira shuts the door behind him and locks it again. She says nothing as she can see the tears in his eyes, and they leave that place. A few more days pass, and then the soldiers of the Crest assemble in the Tame. There are a number of boats waiting to take them out to the drift ships that are going to transport them to the city of Davenar. Benn, Arid, Orchid, and Erdira clamber into a boat with Iron Gull and Lephalia. They have the words of the captain in their ears. The captain gathered them together before they set off and said, "You will be the edge of the knife in Davenar. You have your contract, you have your assignment, you understand the risks and the stakes. Find these Vidala and put an end to them. If possible, bring them back alive for questioning, but," and at this he looks around at the assembled Crest soldiers, "but know that if you drive a blade through their hearts, no one will shed a tear. Be careful in Davenar. From the information I've gathered, the city is quite different than Hartvale. There's a much stricter structure to things. I doubt there will be any issues with a group of mercenaries coming into the city. Mercenary work is always needed. But be mindful of your surroundings. Finish the contract and return to us here. Good luck, and may all the gods that care watch over you and keep you safe." The boats row out, and Benn sees a drift ship called the Andanya. They come alongside it and climb aboard. The ship's steward is a woman named Seta, and she greets them when they board and says, "Don't worry, I'll get you safely to Davenar and back." The lieutenant nods to her and says, "We have every faith in you, steward. Shall we be on our way?" The steward nods and says, "We'll be underway within a bell." As the crests settle in, drums begin to beat, and oars are cast out into the water. The Andanya begins to cut through the sea, and Benn finds himself standing at the edge of the ship, looking out as Hartvale begins to shrink away. The last time he sailed away from the city was at the start of all this mess with the Vidala. Now, they were going to find them. Now, they were going to put an end to the cult of Vargosh. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thank you so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or buy me a coffee at coffee.com/errantadventures. That's ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.